The gate agent's voice echoed across the crowded boarding area. "Sir, economy is at the back. You can't be standing here. This is priority boarding." Everyone turned to look at the old black man, dressed in a worn gray sweater and faded jeans. He smiled softly, holding a small paper boarding pass, and said nothing. But what happened next would stun every elite passenger on board, especially when the billionaire's daughter ran down the aisle, threw her arms around him, and whispered a word that changed everything. "Dad." This is a story about assumptions and how they crumble when truth walks in quietly, with dignity and love. If you believe respect should never depend on appearances, hit that subscribe button now and share where you're watching from. The airport bustled with the usual chaos of a Friday morning. Phones rang, children cried, and the sharp hum of suitcase wheels scraped across the marble floors. Near Gate 38, a polished sign read, "Priority boarding, executive class only." Just beneath it, a line of well-dressed passengers clutched designer luggage and sipped lattes, barely hiding their impatience. Among them stood a quiet, elderly black man. He wore a plain gray cardigan, frayed at the sleeves, and simple slacks. His shoes looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles, and his paper boarding pass trembled slightly in his weathered hands. The gate agent noticed him immediately, and her expression soured. "Sir," she called out, her voice just loud enough to draw attention. "Economy class is back that way." She pointed firmly behind him, as if she were scolding a child who had wandered too far. The man blinked slowly, offering a tired but kind smile. "Yes, I know," he replied gently, "but I believe this is my boarding group." The gate agent scoffed. "With that pass? You must be confused. This line is for our premium travelers." Passengers in the line began to glance his way. A few smirked. One young man in a sleek Armani blazer muttered under his breath, "Trying to sneak into first happens all the time." The old man didn't respond. He simply stood his ground quietly. Moments later, the first-class doors opened. A new wave of passengers began boarding. The agent, eager to keep things moving, gestured toward a uniformed guard nearby. "Can you escort this gentleman back to economy?" she asked flatly. "He's clearly lost." But before the guard could move, a voice cut through the air. "Don't you dare touch him." Everyone turned. A striking woman in her late 20s came striding down the jet bridge, her heels clicking like thunder. She wore a crisp white blazer, gold-rimmed glasses, and an expression of controlled fury. The gate agent blinked. "Excuse me, miss?" "You can't just—" The woman held up a hand. "That man," she said, "is not only in the right place, he's the only reason I'm standing where I am today." She reached the old man and wrapped her arms around him tightly. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. A ripple of gasps filled the waiting area. The old man, now standing beside his elegantly dressed daughter, quietly handed his boarding pass back to the stunned gate agent. Her hands trembled slightly as she scanned it. "Seat. Hey, first class." She blinked in disbelief, but the daughter, now composed, turned toward her. "Next time," she said calmly, "let your scanner speak before your bias does." The surrounding passengers, especially the man in the Armani suit, looked everywhere, but at the elderly gentleman as he and his daughter stepped forward onto the jet bridge. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin was as luxurious as one could imagine. Soft leather seats, polished wood finishes, and champagne already bubbling in crystal glasses. But as the old man and his daughter entered, silence fell. A woman with a Hermes scarf leaned over and whispered to her husband, "I thought they tightened security. First a homeless man outside, now in here too?" The old man heard. He didn't flinch, but his daughter turned her head slowly. "He's not homeless," she said. "He's Harold King, and he paid for this seat with more integrity than you'll ever understand." The woman blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came. They took their seats. The daughter sat beside her father and held his hand, gently rubbing the top of it like she had as a child, when he came home after long hours of janitorial work. Flashback, years earlier. Harold King used to mop floors in corporate offices, the same buildings where others walked by him like he was invisible. He never complained. He saved every dime, skipped meals to pay for his daughter's schooling, and stayed up late teaching her math from secondhand books. He told her she could do anything. She believed him. Now she was Dr. Maya King, a global economist and the newly appointed chief advisor to the board of Carson Aero, the airline whose plane they now sat on. Back in the present, the flight attendant came by with champagne and smiled stiffly. "Would you like something to drink, sir?" Maya looked at her father and raised an eyebrow. "Dad?"
He smiled, not unkindly.
"Orange juice, please." The attendant hurried off, but the cabin hadn't stopped watching. Some passengers whispered. Others stared. Maya leaned in and said softly, "They don't know who you are." Harold smiled. "They don't need to, you do. That's enough for me." She squeezed his hand. But what the others didn't know was that this flight, and this moment, was far from over. The plane cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed. Flight attendants moved down the aisles offering warm towels and dinner menus, and the tension from earlier seemed to dissipate into polite, high-altitude silence. Harold leaned back in his seat, glancing out the window, the clouds glowing like golden fields below. Maya gently laid a folded linen blanket across his lap. "Comfortable?" she asked. He smiled. "More than I deserve." "You deserve more than they'll ever give you," she whispered, her voice tight. "But don't worry, Dad, today isn't just about the ride. It's about the arrival." Suddenly, the voice of the captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I hope you're enjoying your flight with Carcinero. We have a very special announcement to make today, especially for those of you seated in first class." Heads turned. "In recognition of our airline's recent leadership transition, we're honored to welcome on board one of our newest executive board members and Dr. Maya King, who's seated in 1B. There was a gasp from the woman in the Hermes scarf. Someone dropped a fork. Maya gave a small wave to no one in particular. The voice continued. "And sitting beside her is someone equally special. He's not on the board. He's not a shareholder. But without him, none of this would be possible." Maya's eyes welled. "That gentleman is Harold King, a man who spent his life working late shifts, taking the bus in the snow and raising one of the finest minds in global economics. Today, he's not just a passenger. He's a symbol of what it means to believe in someone." The entire cabin was silent. Even the woman who had whispered about homeless men earlier now stared at Harold as if seeing him for the first time. "And that's why," the captain finished, "this flight and all Carcinero flights today are flying under a new honorary callsign HK1 in his name." It was Maya who leaned over and wiped the tear from her father's cheek. "You knew they'd do that," he whispered. "I asked them not to," she said, "but they insisted. You've been invisible too long." A flight attendant came by again, but this time with something different. A small velvet box. "For Mr. King," she said, her voice softer than before. "From the board of directors." Harold opened it slowly. Inside was a solid brass pin shaped like a pair of wings. Engraved on it were the words, "First to lift, last to fall." Someone clapped. Then another. Then the entire first-class cabin and beyond began clapping. Harold, overwhelmed, pressed his hand to his chest. "I never needed any of this." "I know," Maya said, her voice cracking. "But you earned it anyway." When the plane landed at JFK International, the sun had just begun to rise over the New York skyline. The runway shimmered in golden hues, and a luxury black sedan waited near the jet bridge. Passengers filed out, murmuring among themselves, some avoiding Harold's eyes, others nodding with tight smiles. But the woman in the Hermes scarf stood still near the exit, her head bowed slightly. As Harold and Maya prepared to leave, the same flight attendant from earlier, the one who had refused to serve him, and appeared. Her eyes were red, her voice low. "I didn't know who you were, sir. I made an assumption. I just wanted to say I'm deeply sorry." Harold didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he gently smiled. "I'm not who you think I am, ma'am. I'm just a man who loved his daughter, enough to take the bus every day. For 30 years. She blinked, confused. But he walked on, leaving her to reflect on something much deeper than just her mistake. That night, in her penthouse overlooking Manhattan, Maya poured a glass of wine and opened her father's old leather briefcase, the one he had carried since she was in middle school. Inside she found an old newspaper clipping of Maya winning a science fair, a faded photo of her in her graduation cap, a laminated bus schedule from Chicago Transit Authority, and finally a sealed letter addressed, "To be opened when the world finally knows her name." She sat down and opened it. "My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, the world finally knows what I've known all along. that you were never meant for sidewalks, but for skyways, that the quiet girl who read under flickering bus stop lights would one day light up boardrooms and carry entire companies forward. They may celebrate you today, but I remember the tears behind every degree, the fear behind every application, and the strength you never realized you had. If they ever ask who helped you rise, tell them it was all you. But between us, I'll always know. My greatest achievement was getting to watch you soar. And Maya, never lower your wings to fit anyone's view. Weeks later, a new portrait was unveiled at Carson Aero's headquarters. It showed Harold King, sitting on a bench in front of the terminal, feeding birds, dressed in a simple coat and holding his bus pass and with a soft smile. The brass plaque below read, "The man who carried a queen, Harold King, beloved father, silent hero, the lift behind the rise."